I think to be able to scale unresponsibly, you would need to be part of one of these big handful of folks in the leader pack that is starting to pull away. I don't think you'll have the capability to do anything irresponsible if you're not at this point part of what is called a team that will consist of government entities, some of these large company research labs, and so forth. So again, I think we need to distinguish if you're inside that quantum curtain or outside that quantum curtain. Outside that quantum curtain, you're not going to do much harm. And, maybe you'll have a scam investment portfolio and the saving of some people, right?
Welcome to Impact Quantum.
Quantum podcast, turn it up fast. Candace and Frank blowing my mind at last. Quantum podcast, they're breaking the mold. Science and sky beats, it's bold and it's
Hello and welcome back to Impact Quantum, the podcast where we explore the emerging field of quantum computers, where you don't necessarily need to be a physicist, you just need to be curious. And with me today, as always, is the most quantum curious person I know, Candace Kahuli. How's it going, Candace?
It's going great, Frank. Thank you so much. I'm really excited because today we're going to be talking to Andre Koenig. And he's very exciting. He is a strategic consulting company in quantum, and he's helping industry leaders and countries and media and just about everybody understand the fantastic world of quantum. Hi, Andre.
Love quantum. I love impact. I love the quantum curious. Good to be back with both of you and your audience. It's a spooky world, an overused and abused term in quantum, but it's the truth. It's a technology that is still early, but it is unsurpassed in its excitement to how it might transform our future, and it comes with many different expressions and flavors. Peeling back the layers of that onion is what we do at the Global Quantum Intelligence. We've been around for 10 years. So we're a decision intelligence company, so data analytics, data mining on the supply chains of quantum, geopolitical aspects, investments in quantum, anything that a government or strategic investor in quantum might need to hopefully make the best possible decision on this crazy, spooky quantum news.
Very cool. Welcome back to the show. You were on a previous episode, and great to have you back.
That is our discussion. Let's peel back that onion and see what we find. Professor Asherlam, the head of the quantum computing lab at the University of Chicago, a very famous researcher. So it took a lot of persistence, the long story short. That kind of experience was recurring for 3-4 years until people started to recognize that maybe it takes more than just physics to actually build a company, a technology, and a product. So that's when my services started to do traction.
Especially in the startup space, right? You're, at least with my experience, when I'm working with people who are in the startup space, it's normally the engineer that's come up with the idea, that decides that I've come up with the idea, so I really understand it and I want to run the company. And they don't necessarily have the right skill set. Running a company with a business mind is very different from coming from it strictly from the scientific engineering side. And that's why it takes all kinds of people to run the world, right? Like we all have skills that are needed in this.
That's a problem with quantum technologies a lot. We have a solution looking for a problem, which is a typical startup problem. I've seen any industry, but all these amazing researchers that I admire so much came up with a lot of solutions, right? Oh, here's quantum entanglement. Now we can use this quantum entanglement to exchange information, make it secure. Sure, there's a problem. We need secure information exchange, right? We need secure communication, but it comes out of a solution. We discovered a new solution. It seems to fit many different problems, but when the rubber hits the road, it's a lot more nuanced than that. And that is certain.
That is, so there's so many problems out there, right? So you look at, for example, what quantum computing could do for precision medicine, right? Or what quantum computing could do for weather forecasting, right? So that, for example, we wouldn't have the kind of terrible disasters that we're having nowadays. You know, what do you think is really one of the biggest problems in need of a quantum solution out there that would be achievable in the next, let's say, 5-10 years?
I think people have that exactly wrong because we don't know if it can really help us predict the weather better. Yes, on paper it can, but do we have enough algorithmic speed up on this specific problem to actually do it? What is the cost of it in terms of computational time, power consumption? And then how do we implement it? How does it work with classical data? How do we connect it to existing weather workflows and weather data silos and so forth? And that's what I mean when the rubber hits the road. As soon as you start to look into these use cases, and we tracked over 200 of them across 8 industries, it gets very difficult to see the enterprise end user benefit of it. So the way that I look at it, benefit of hindsight here, is the way that the people should have looked at the internet, right? The internet is something new. Nobody knew that the first and most successful application of it would be payments and payments for a certain type of entertainment, right? You couldn't imagine that. You couldn't come up with that. That's not a use case that anybody had in a spreadsheet that was tracking the digital networking space or so forth. So the problem that can benefit from quantum as a solution hasn't been invented yet, but it comes out of the realm of what Feynman said. Don't think so then classically if you want to understand nature. And that's the powerful aspect of quantum, really simulating natural and dynamics. We do with that is teach of it.
So are you willing to, for example, hazard a guess as to which industry you feel quantum will be able to impact first?
I have a client paying me $400,000 right now to answer that question for them, and we argue every week over it. And I give them exactly that answer, which really doesn't satisfy them, especially considering what they pay us. We have to play the game and do break it down by industries and application use cases. And yes, there are ways to prioritize it and frame the risk in terms of the timeline and ROI. And of course, things like quantum chemistry, especially from a materials point of view, seem to be closest to the code in terms of timeline and potential ROI. But again, it needs a lot more than just a quantum computer and a quantum algorithm to deliver on. And I think if you bet on an individual use case or an individual industry, you're going to be outvoted.
Okay. So if you could cut through all the hype, what do you feel is one misconception about quantum technology that you wish every executive understood?
It's what is it called? Amara's law. We overestimate the impact of quantum in the short term and underestimate its impact in the long term. True for so many technologies out there, right? And when you read the news, especially if you're a CEO that might not be as active in quantum as folks at JP Morgan or Boeing or some of those early adopters, you could say to yourself, every week, a record fundraise, new breakthrough announcement, new quantum advantage experiment. These are the first steps in a marathon. We've been saying that for many years, but a marathon is long. We're still in the first steps of a marathon. We're starting to see a run a marathon. I know where the pack in a marathon starts to form at what mile, but we're at that mile where you have a small pack of 20 people or probably a handful of companies in quantum computing that are pulling a tiny little bit away from the rest, but nothing more. It is very early. You need to understand. It's like going to the gym. You're training a muscle here. And if you want to go to the gym, you're not saying, oh, I'm only going to do arm, unless you're an arm wrestler. But even if you're an arm wrestler, you do other muscles as well. Quantum is a methodology, it's a philosophy. It's not about a specific industry or specific use case. And that's the biggest misconception. Do you want to play in a field that will dominate the future of humanity? Yes.
That's a really, honestly, that's the first time I've ever heard that as the answer for the biggest misconception. But you're not living in the hype. You really are being surgical and strategic about the information that you see that's out there and what can be done with it. As an investor, how do you distinguish between startups that have real staying power and those that are just more hype than substance?
You don't. And again, an answer that is really difficult for an investor. We've done $2.5 billion in deals with from Angel to VC and SPAC. Let me get back to the previous question for a second. Quantum is not an invention, it's a discovery. Einstein, I'll just introduce him to everybody, right? Einstein and his colleagues, Max Planck and Bohr, they discovered new laws of how the world worked at the particle and subparticle level. And now, for the last 20, 25 years, we're trying to build technology and products on top of that. It's not an invention. The internet is an invention. Bitcoin is an invention. SaaS platforms is an invention. Salesforce is an invention. These are smart people inventing a product or a service or a technology to fix a problem that they saw. Quantum is not an invention, it's a discovery. And we're now trying to figure out what we can do with it and what we can build on top of it. And that's what we have to understand. And no matter if you're a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, an angel investor, or a VC, as an economist, I would tell you build a portfolio. And from both constituencies, right? As a user, build a portfolio of usage, not just of use cases if you're in aerospace, but also how you're going to use it. Can you use it for workforce development? Can you use it for strategic decision making? Can you use it for machine learning, of course, quantum machine learning? Build a portfolio of usage. Same for the investor. Build a portfolio of companies. Bet on a couple of products, bet on a couple of teams, horse versus jockey, bet on a couple of different applications. Don't make just fun. We're way, way too early.
Okay. So there's a lot of time we're talking about with our guests, quantum and AI, and how they really can be interesting if they're going to work together. And I wanted to know from your perspective, what excites you the most about the intersection of quantum and AI?
Our ability to use AI to make quantum better. We call it, we write way too many reports. And one of our reports, we had a couple of weeks of internal argument what to call it because it's about the quantum and AI. But do we call it quantum and AI? Do we call it quantum AI? Do we call it quantum for AI? Do we call it AI for quantum? Actually, I don't even remember what we ended up calling it. But in it, on the first page, you will see that there is quantum for AI, there's AI for quantum, and then there is quantum and AI. What we're most excited about is AI for quantum, because that's the only thing that's tangible over the next few years. Everything else is in the realm of possibilities and nice to have. But today we can use AI for quantum in error correction, of course, that is being done by many companies. We can use it. Microsoft has the Copilot, the Whirly and Springboard, and the entire platform around it in terms of how can you use AI to frame your quantum problem set and then build those gate models and circuits. And then many other AI methodologies that will probably inform how we speed up the development from a scientific point of view all the way to an engineering point of view.
Okay. So do you think that right now we are actually at the inflection point that everyone keeps saying we're there, or do you still think that we're still a little bit off from it?
I don't understand that question. What is there? Where is there? Show me there on the map. Yes, we're there. Inflection, the company, announced a $1.8 billion SPAC this week. We're there. I'm an economist. You ask me an economist if we're there. Yeah, the company just raised 1.8 billion. I'd like that 1.8 billion. Yeah, we're there. So what does there mean? I'm on my way to Washington, D.C. after this podcast for some meetings on the Hill. Quantum is there. It's at that level, at the geopolitical consideration game, as real as AI and biotech, if not more. But again, is it there for the airline CEO that needs to optimize cargo loading, plane deplaning, and so forth? No, and it's not going to be for many years. Let's stop fueling those planes that in 2026, 2027, 2028, all these industries will see revolutions in their Monte Carlo traveling salesmen and logistics problems. That's just not the case, right? But quantum is there today. And even if you're an airline CEO or a bank CEO or a pharma CEO, quantum is there today because you need to get ahead of the learning curve. You need to build your partnerships. You need to build your teams. And you need to think about that usage model for you beyond the use cases.
That's a good point. But no, I think you're right in terms of in terms of, it's a question only quantum industry seems to have. Is it there yet, right? And I always wonder why that is, because like to your point, in some places it's there, and what is there, right? If there is raising large sums of capital, clearly it's there. If it's there, and no matter how much of a bubble, there's always an expectation if you're raising capital that there's going to be a return on some investment there, right? So there's something there, and I think you're right. Clearly, there's a big national security impact in this space. But you're right. It's not going to be the point where airline CEOs are going to care about it, right? Maybe, definitely not by 2026. For lucky 2036, right? Probably closer to 2046. And it's always this weird dynamic in this, right? You'll have Jensen Huang say earlier in 2025, it'll be 20, 30 years before we get a practical quantum computer. What constitutes practical, right? That's a very loaded question. And I think that, to your point, it's already here, but you could argue that the computer age started with the mainframe, right? But then a lot of kids these days will say that the computer age started in the 90s with AOL and Windows 95, which is laughable. It's hard to say that without laughing.
Yep, and good to see you. Weren't sure you'd make it.
Yeah, thanks for your patience.
But and you asked me earlier, Candace, and I think this is the second big misconception. We're all sitting here, and I blame the vendors, which are my clients and friends, so apologies. But we're all sitting here with a hammer and trying to hammer this quantum thing into a square box when it is some wild, crazy, round galaxy, whatever it might look like. We gotta stop attaching the success of quantum to industries, to enterprise use cases, to ROI. That is not what quantum is. That is what quantum along the way at some point will do, and it will be huge, transformative for many industries. But that's not what quantum is. Quantum is many other things. It is a way for some very smart people to make some really good money, and quantum is there for that. It is a top 3, top 5 national security priority. We are aware of 33 national quantum missions. Quantum is there more than any other technology, and it is a way to understand nature in the future. And there are barely any other topics on which there is more research being published than quantum. When you look at physics, nature, natural sciences, and so forth. Quantum is there in a big way. It's not going anywhere. There's no quantum. But this box that we're trying to hammer it in use cases and ROI, it's just one small quantum, one small part of quantum, one small aspect of quantum. It's going to come at some point, but we're attaching too much weight to it, which, again, vendors who took on investors and board of directors, they are forced to play that game, tell that storyline. It is the way it is, and we'll deliver on it. But that's not the main driver.
What advice would you give students or professionals who want to pivot into quantum but don't have a physics background?
Absolutely, go for it. It is fascinating. I don't think we need to argue over the fact that we're in America here, right? Not the same as in Europe, where my roots are. Technology will rule the world in a large way. Quantum is going to be one of those main technologies. Yes, there will be others. AI is not going anywhere, but there will be others as well. But quantum is the most transformative, the most impactful. It's also the one that is still the earliest on the curve. So you have the biggest, and good luck getting into AI right now.
Right.
Sure, say AI there. Yeah, if you want to slap together a pitch deck and say you have a new LLM that's energy efficient and whatever, you can probably raise 50 million and disappear onto my Caribbean island and never be seen again. But good luck getting into AI today, right? Well, blockchain will say, please come into blockchain, do crypto. But that space is dominated by some big players already. Quantum isn't. So I think don't be afraid of it. At the same time, take it serious. That this is not an invention, as I said earlier, that you can easily apprehend and understand. Go to a couple of conferences, watch a couple of YouTube videos. You really have to be willing to dig in and take a bet on it. And stick to it. If you're willing to do that, it doesn't matter if you have a physics background, you will pick up those details. And we need diverse talents. We need other people than quantum physicists in the field. So don't be afraid, but be ready to make the commitment and be ready to understand that this is a much steeper learning curve.
Very cool. That having been said, What do you think that the future looks like for people who are adjacent to the science aspect of it, right? The marketers, right? Because that's one of the things that Candice and I had a discussion earlier in this year, is actually partly brought on by the controversial statements at CES that Jensen Huang made, right? Because obviously you're going to need a core set of technologists, physicists, right? That's without a question. But beyond that, you're going to need people that to do the go-to-marketing aspects of it, right? The marketing aspects, the sales, right? And the customer success. The previous show we had was, and we touched upon it with a few previous guests too, where you buy a quantum solution, right? And in this case, it was an on-prem solution. It was like, oh, someone has to rack and stack these machines, right? If you're dealing with a cloud service, it's not really as much of an issue. The vendor or the cloud provider would take on that risk, but at some point, these have to be practical enterprise technologies, right? Who can you, even if you don't want to be a physicist and you don't want to do that, do you think there's a future for kind of people who are adjacent to the core technology and they could specialize in kind of the special concerns that come up in this space and maybe not traditional IT?
I feel like I'm at the dentist now because you're hitting a little bit of a nerve here with again, many people in quantum are my clients and friends, also on the marketing and PR side. And yes, these people are needed, but when you look at what's happening in marketing and PR, and I can tell you one of the biggest shifts over the last couple of years was that a couple of years ago, CEOs would email me with their latest update and explain it in a very kind of constructive, factual, technology, product, market way. Today, every day, I get half a dozen emails from some PR firm. Oh, company XYZ, quantum. Did you know? By the way, did you know? Yeah, I do. I've been in quantum for 10 years. Maybe you don't know that. But did you know that company XYZ published a breakthrough yesterday that will transform blah, blah, blah. And it's, can you use language on your podcast? It's fucking cool. Like
Right.
these people that really don't know what they're talking about, and they are partly to blame for what some people might call a quantum winter, at least on this commercial side that's attached to RI and use cases. There is so much just wrong, fundamentally wrong narrative, storytelling, and positioning of fundamental technologies and products that it is harming the industry. But there is such a demand and such a need for people that are adjacent to the quantum science and engineering profession, that even legal. I'm going to a quantum legal workshop in a few days, 2 weeks in Washington. We need all those functions, HR, and there's a small handful of headhunters in quantum, but even
Right.
they don't really understand how educational credentials align with technical requirements, market realities. And that's why I said earlier, that is the opportunity. So if you are not a quantum scientist and you want to get into quantum, absolutely, it is a huge opportunity. The price of that opportunity is to be serious about quantum, really understand it. And that's a commitment, that's a learning curve. If and when you do that, you will have a huge impact in marketing, in PR, in legal, in product management, in operations, in HR, in all these adjacent professions. But we're desperate for talent. I need a marketer. I can't find one. I've tried agencies, I've tried freelancers. I can't afford to pay a quantum scientist to do my LinkedIn posts, but it needs to be technically accurate, yet have a marketing voice. Extremely difficult to do.
Interesting.
That's interesting. That's interesting because you want to think about how companies are supposed to build teams that can address all of these different issues between the interdisciplinary teams that bridge the gap between the scientists, the engineers, and the business strategists. How can companies work on that difficulty?
It's difficult. I'd argue that my company's VQI is one puzzle piece there, right? We give you that decision intelligence, the baseline, the references, the data, the frameworks to build those functions from marketing to strategy, finance, and so forth. So that's what we're hoping to contribute there. But then I think it's just be humble. Don't assume it is like AI or SaaS or we see so many HPC people in quantum. Oh, quantum is just like HPC. We'll build the same systems, same pricing models, same go-to-market models. And that's just not the case, right? You have to be smart, but you have to be willing to be humble. And I think you have to be a real entrepreneur. That's what it comes down to. It's a discovery, not an invention. You're discovering the business models and then the marketing narratives at the same time that we're discovering how to build the best possible and scale them. So I don't have a good answer to that, Candace, but I think being a dedicated, committed entrepreneur, this is one of the biggest opportunities we'll have.
Yeah, and I see this potentially as big as the transistor, potentially, over the long haul, right? I don't want to add to the hype wave, right? There's plenty of energy in that hype wave. Not in the next 2 years, but I think over the long haul. And I think also, too, just like the transistor, I can't imagine somebody at Bell Labs in the 60s imagining TikTok, right, would be a thing, right? Or the iPhone, or pick any type of thing, right? Like you're nodding for those that don't know. So it seems like you generally agree with that. I think the question is how much is when the time frame, I think, is really the one of the great unknown variables here, right? And it's probably going to be measured in decades, but again, if you're making billions of dollars, and at least as of we're recording this, billions of dollars is still a lot of money. And I say that in jest because I was just listening to an autobiography of, not an autobiography, but a biography on William Randolph Hearst. And when he inherited his wealth, it was not, the numbers because of inflation were very different, right? So you kind of have to do the mental math in terms of that. Billions, as we're recording this, is still a lot of money.
We're trying to make billions. I am pretty old, but I'm not old enough to remember the transistor days. But I'm wondering if people were worried about timelines and ROI during the transistor days, which took a couple of decades, right? Really.
I think they were. I'm not old enough to remember that either, but I remember watching a documentary on the history of computing, and there was this was the days of vacuum tubes, right? So like when the computer broke, you went in, you unscrewed the vacuum tube, and you replaced it and you turn it back on, right? So one of the journalists was asking the inventor of the transistor, like, if these things are microscopic, what are you going to have, like somebody with tweezers and like a thing and a little soldering gun and fix it? He goes, no. It'll be so cheap. If one of the thing blows on the chip, you can just get a new chip. And like their eyes lit up. And I think, I don't know, like that, I think those are like, whenever there's a big paradigm shift, and I hate using that word because it's been so overused, but whenever there's a big paradigm shift, a lot of the baggage from the previous era tends to come along in the first generation or two. One of the most fascinating things I heard was when factories started to get electrify, right? So prior to that, they would basically have a water wheel attached to a river that would turn a crank, and all the machinery had to be like aligned with the crank. So with electricity, you don't really need that. But the first few generations of factories that were built, they had the crankshaft mindset. And I'm trying to remember where I heard this, but it was an interesting concept of, so all the machines were lined up in a particular way. And then somebody a couple of years into it was like, wait a minute, we can just run a wire anywhere, right? As long as we have the electricity kind of working. And then that led to a whole radical shift in how factories were designed. And I think that maybe could be the same thing with quantum, right? Where we have certain assumptions about compute and compute costs today. And again, not adding to the hype, this isn't going to be 2026, 2027. This is going to be 15, 20 years down the line, right? Where we'll rethink a lot of things because of quantum.
We're in a paradigm shift from making billions to trillions.
Yes, I like that. I could use a trillion or two myself.
I think you just gave the perfect answer, right? And that's how people need to think about it. This is what you do in engineering. You iterate. And I mentioned earlier portfolio. Why is everybody looking for the answer? Again, quantum, the dare is here today and now. You can have a career in quantum today and now. You can build an application in quantum today and now. You can build a business in quantum today and now. Is that going to be the same career, the same application, the same business today that it will be in 5 years or in 20 years? Hopefully not, because quantum will be such a paradigm shift and we start making trillions instead of billions. But just iterate rather than looking for the optimal answer. If you're not willing to do that, then stick with AI and Bitcoin.
I am old enough to remember the dot-com crash, and I do worry about, or is the AI field setting themselves up for an equal crash? But also, too, crypto did have a crash, but crypto's not completely DOA the same way that the tech industry felt in the early 2000s. The future is hard to predict because it hasn't happened yet. So
happen, but the cycles are good, crashes are good. That means more talent and more resources for quantum, and I'll be egoistic and happy about that. But yeah, let's reframe the conversation. To me, that's the biggest takeaway from our conversation today. Quantum is
Right.
here today. Just understand what year and today means. You can have use cases, success, careers, no matter who you are, what you are today, that will be different from tomorrow. Stop trying to understand the timeline. Just enjoy the ride and maximize your impact as you're learning. And that's how you'll be more successful every day, every week.
Interesting.
So let me ask you this. How do you see the recent G7 quantum accord shaping collaboration versus competition in quantum?
Now the dentist is drilling past the nerve into the flesh. I'm a pessimist on that question. You tell me, but I do think that we live in a bipolar world. I think that crash will cycle, the shakeout will leave us with a bipolar technology world. I'm certain that quantum bipolar quantum universe. I think especially on our side, the US side, that does come with a dust cloud. What the dust cloud looks like, G7, AUKUS, NATO, something else is impossible to predict. Quantum is also I've used the term of other project, happy project, but it is just something that requires resources, talent, supply chains that go beyond even our capacity capabilities. So we do need those good, reliable partners. What exactly that looks like, I think, also depends on the geopolitical situation outside quantum, right? That will drive how our relationships will be shaped in the next few years. That's why quantum, again, is just a way to simulate nature. So whatever shakes out, I think, in the wider world is what we'll see in quantum. But we need friends to do it. But I think it is going to be not unlike nuclear. Some people talk about the quantum curtain. There will be a curtain, and you're either on the inside or the outside of the quantum curtain. That's going to be an iron curtain with I don't know how many watts of energy gets flowing through it. So I think it's going to be very protective, at least at the large scale level, very expensive.
No, that's a good way to put it, because you have to wonder if there is a true breakthrough in quantum, that there's going to be people that would want to keep that quiet, particularly when it comes to RSA encryption, right? For as long as they possibly can. So I often wonder, like, where is the true cutting edge right now, right? How much of it is above board, right? It doesn't matter what country, right? Any country that would do that would be, just look to your history books, right? Anyone who can break encryption, they tend to keep it quiet for as long as they can, right? And it just, I don't know, like, I am both fearful and optimistic about the future.
That's exactly the question. If you have a
Right.
quantum computer of a certain size, teraflop, would you want to tell the world about it? Yes or no? And would you want to run your Monte Carlo optimization on Wall Street with it? Yes or no? Or you rather miss out on those billions or potentially trillions at that point and maintain that kind of weapon, defensive, offensive capability and surprise them? And it's an inappropriate comparison, but it is more powerful than a nuclear attack. I think people don't understand the consequence of a full encryption act. It would be civil war. People would starve to death. They would not have access to any communication, any elsewhere in finance. Power would be out, right? It's a little bit of a slower death, fewer burn wounds, but absolutely fatal and tragic. That's why I think there will be a quantum curtain. That's why I think it will be a small clock on the inside of the quantum curtain, faced with one adversary that might have a couple of allies as well. And then you'll have different versions of quantum that will run on Wall Street, that will run pharmaceutical and so forth. They'll come from all over the place, and we'll see some use cases of ROI there, right? Which is fantastic and potentially transformative. But the real power of quantum will be very, very elusive, exclusive.
What lessons can quantum entrepreneurs learn from the evolution of AI or biotech industries in terms of scaling responsibly?
I think to be able to scale unresponsibly, you would need to be part of one of these big handful of folks in the leader pack that is starting to pull away. I don't think you'll have the capability to do anything irresponsible if you're not at this point part of what's called a team that will consist of government entities, some of these large company research labs, and so forth. So again, I think we need to distinguish if you're inside that quantum curtain or outside that quantum curtain. Outside that quantum curtain, you're not going to do much harm. And, maybe you'll have a scam investment portfolio and the saving of some people, right? Which is absolutely terrible. Should be recommended, but you're not going to have a future. If you're on the inside of that iron curtain, I think you just need to think about the future you want for yourself and the next generation. Every one of these cycles, pick your poison.
Yeah, you keep on talking about that there's this divide. There's going to be those like the haves and the have-nots, or those that are working and using quantum technology as opposed to those that are just not accepting it or not working with it. And I'm sure that divide must worry you a little bit.
I think you see that every day in the world, right? Back to AI, and I am by no means a prompt expert, but the difference in results that you can get when you know how to engineer and write a proper prompt for ChatGPT or Gemini or Grok versus just, hey, please give me every company in quantum and their investments. It's a tremendous difference with a huge impact. And even amongst my educated, smart tech friends, I'm shocked how many people even take time to learn about prompt engineering and probably use these new AI tools, right? So we already live in a world of haves or have not, and that world has penetrated our elites. And quantum is just a lot more complex and inaccessible than any other technology. Yes, it is definitely concerning.
So if people are interested in finding out more about you and what you do, where would you suggest they go to find that information?
I'm hard to avoid. This the pain of all my distractors, but just Google Andre and quantum. I have a website, Andre Koenig, konig.com. You find lots of beautiful pictures, videos, speeches, links to all my companies. So yeah, happy to chat with anyone, whether if you want to get started and help solve the PR marketing dilemma in quantum, or you're a quantum scientist that thinks it's found the new qubit of the future.
Very cool. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming back on the show, and we'll let our AI finish the show.
Candace and Frank blowing my mind at last. Quantum podcast, they're breaking the mold. Science and sky beats, it's bold and it's gold. The multiverse is skanking in time. Black holes are wailing in a horn line so fine. From Planck scales to planets, they're connecting the dots. Candace and Frank, they're the cosmic hot shot. Quantum podcast, turn it up fast. Candace and Frank blowing my mind at last. Quantum podcast, they're breaking the mold. Science and sky beats, it's bold and it's gold.